Yeah, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Shall we start the session or should we wait for 1 more minute, like 2 more minutes for the participants to join?
Yeah, we can start. Yeah.
Okay. A very good morning to all the respected dignitaries, esteemed panelists and participants. On behalf of NIDM, I extend you all a very warm welcome to the last and final day of this three-day training program on quantifying disaster risk and risk reduction with special reference to Zendaya framework and PM 10-point agenda, which is organized by NIDM in collaboration with Farooq College, Kerala. I'm here to give a brief recap about the topics we have learned in the first and second day of our training program. I'll start with the first day. Our first session was Introduction to Disaster and Disaster Management and was handled by Vivek Sharma, where he explained about different types of disasters, the disasters which has happened in India over the years, and it was a detailed presentation about the disasters and disaster management. And our second session was on disaster risk and risk reduction, institutional systems in India. And the session was taken by Mr. Prabjot Singh, and he explained about the structure of government organizations, which helps in effective management of disaster risks and risk reduction. He also explained about the nodal agencies working in disaster management. And he also explained about the history of disasters and also gave an idea about the disaster scenario on global and national level. Our third and final session was risk reduction, underlying risk factors and assessment. And it was taken by Shihabuddin MT of Farooq College. He explained in detail about the term exposure and vulnerability, and also about different kinds of vulnerability. He also explained about the risk assessment, risk reduction, and also about the risk factors such as climate change, the rural and urban link to climate change, environmental degradation, poorly planned urban development, poverty, and weak governance. He concluded his session by elaborating on different kinds of measures which can be adopted for disaster risk reduction, such as physical risk reduction measures, socioeconomic disaster risk reduction measures, environmental measures, and finally, management and institutional measures. Now I move on to the second day of our training programs. The second day of training program started with a brief recap of first day. And the first session, the fourth session, was on qualitative and quantitative approaches to risk assessment and overview. And it was handled by Dr. Muhammad Qasim C. from Farooq College. He started his session by giving a brief about the concept in disaster risk assessment. And he also explained about the methodologies involved in calculation of risk, that is the qualitative and quantitative approaches to risk assessment. He covered the major topics such as probabilistic and deterministic risk analysis, historical analysis, expert elicitation, risk metrics approach, and he concluded his session by describing indicator-based approach. Our fifth and sixth session was handled by Dr. Roswine Joy from Presidency University on risk assessment process and evaluation methods and quantification of disaster risk. She started with a brief intro about disaster risk assessment and process of risk assessment and explained in detail about the concepts in risk assessment and frameworks which are used in disaster risk research. She concluded her first session by describing about the evaluation methods which are used in which are used for evaluating disaster risk. Her second session was quantification of risk, in which she elaborated about the alternative perspective of risk and assessment. She explained the process of risk estimation with the help of case study from Ernakulam, and she explained with the help of her own research project, that is climate sensitive aquaculture. And it was a very detailed presentation about how water quality affects aquaculture in lakes and ponds. The last and final session for the second day of the training program was taken jointly by Professor Santosh Kumar Sir, GIDRR and DRR Division Head, NIDM, and by me. The topic was titled Probabilistic and Deterministic Risk Assessment Methods. The session started with defining and advantages of probabilistic risk assessment methods and how is it involved in decision making and the steps involved in PRA and about basic components of PRA. And I also explained in detail about event tree analysis and fault tree analysis, and also explained about the evaluation of uncertainty and variability. Professor Santosh Kumar Sir explained in detail about the deterministic risk assessment methods, and he summarized all the sessions by giving examples from the states. He stressed on the importance of risk-informed planning and also about the importance of incorporating disaster risk reduction measures and strategies in development planning. And this was a brief recap of our first and second day of our training program. And today we have three sessions, and it will be taken by the macroeconomic impacts of disaster risk will be taken by Dr. Yasser P from Farooq College. And the second session is on Zendai framework, that is about the understanding risk, disaster risk. That is, we will be explaining in detail about the first priority of Zendai framework, and will be taken by Mr. Ali Haider, Junior Consultant of NIDM. And the third session will be on Kerala floods and PM 10-point agenda. It will be a case study and it will be handled by Mr. John George from KSDMA. And moving on, today is our last and final day of our training program, and Sahaduddin from Farooq College will be moderating the session. Sahaduddin is an assistant professor in Department of Economics, Farooq College. He obtained a master's and MPhil from Pondicherry University. He worked as a lecturer in PG Center, Lakshadweep University of Calicut, and he has also published several papers in referred journals and also served as a resource person for workshops in econometrics. Over to you, sir.
Okay, good morning to all. Thank you, Susan, for your nice introduction.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so once again, welcome to the final day of 3-day training program on quantifying risk and risk reductions with special reference to Sendai framework and Prime Minister 10-point agenda. So we are on the last stage of our training program. We are on the final day. So today we have 3 panelists and 3 presenters. Okay, and they are discussing on different aspects of risk and risk reductions. The first session will be on macroeconomic impact of disaster risk. It will be done by Dr. Yasser P from Farooq College. The second presentation will be on Sendai framework, understanding the disaster risk, and it will be handled by Mr. Ali Haider. And the final session will be on Kerala flood and PM 10-point agenda, a case study. It will be done by John George from KSDMA. So let me invite the first presenter, Dr. Yasser P. He is assistant professor at the Department of Economics, Farooq College. He completed his master's, MPhil, and PhD from Hyderabad University. He published many papers in International Scopus Index Journal and served as resource person for several research methodology workshops. And his research interest includes international trade, finance, and economics of inequality. Dr. Yasser sir, please, and your allotted time is 50 minutes.
Thank you, sir, for a nice introduction. Am I audible, Sahaduddin sir?
Yeah, audible.
Okay.
Yeah,
Is it okay, sir?
yeah, okay. You can start.
Okay. Okay, respected uh, coordinators of this program, Susan Sukanya from NITM and Professor Santosh Kumar, and also other coordinators from Farooq College, head of the department, Farooq College Economics Department, Muhammad Rashid sir, and Dr. Qasim, and chair of this session, Sahabuddin, a warm and other participants of this program, a warm good morning to all of you. It is it makes me immense pleasure to make a presentation in this 3 days training program and express my deep gratitude to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to make my presentation and also express my views on this disaster risk management. So my topic is macroeconomic impacts of disaster risk. So in the last couple of days, we have already discussed various issues related with risk management, and also we have covered how what are the techniques which can be used to reduce the risk, and also we have discussed several issues related with that. So today I'm making a presentation on macroeconomic impact of disaster risk. So this is also very important topic which need to be considered and also need large number of deliberations from academicians. So firstly, let me start with a story. Suppose that we have several participants here. Suppose that 3 or 4 members from this group is making an all India trip. Suppose that they wants to travel in all states and they are traveling, suppose they are starting from Kerala, okay, and they wants to go through all the states and they can go to the Kashmir and they can come back, and they are making an all India trip. Nowadays it is very common, some people are traveling with the even cycle and bikes. So they are suppose that they are traveling with a car, and they have started from Kerala, and they have entered to Karnataka, and they have reached Bangalore. Unfortunately or unexpectedly, one accident happened, and this car of these people was collided with a bus. Okay, so the car was the glass was broken and some problem happened on the engine, and also the front part was collapsed. So several issues were happened. So at this time, among these 4 members, one person was a technician or a mechanic. So he said, "Don't worry, I can manage this problem." So he started rectifying the issues, and there were some issues for the engine, and he rectified that. And the major problems was rectified at that time itself. But still, there were some issues with the glass, and in the front portion was collapsed, and all these things. So it was not rectified properly. But he said, "Now it is okay. We can continue our journey, but later on we can rectify other problems also." So I have said this incident because if there is a sudden shock or negative shock, there is an urgent need of some policy or some intervention So this mechanic made that intervention, then they continued their journey, and later on they may have go to some other workshop and they may do other jobs also. In the same case, when we are talking about any disaster or any negative shock to the economy, it will have a short-run impact and also long-run impact. So the short-run impact might be rectified within, for the time being, it might be rectified. But the long-run impact also might have, there might be several issues come. Am I audible? Hello?
Yeah, sir, audible.
Okay. So there might be some issues in the future also. So when we are talking about this impacts of any disaster, it may have two parts, like short-run impacts, and also it may have long-run impacts. So we are connecting these two impacts, short-run and long-run impacts, and also we are suggesting some policies also to mitigate this disaster risk. So this is my presentation. So as you know, there might be some storms, floods, droughts, or other potentially damaging natural events across the world, and sometimes it may lead to a natural disaster. So if there is a natural disaster, so it may lead to, I think some sound disturbance is there. Okay, can you mute that? I don't know whose sound is coming. Okay, there are some.
Yeah, sir, it's okay now. Hello, Yasir, sir. You are not audible now.
Yeah, is it okay?
Yeah, okay, yes, sir. Yeah, go on.
Okay, so if there is some kind of disaster, obviously there will be some damage to the economies also, and there will be cost of this damage also will be high. And most of the disasters is weather related disasters, and if there is a disaster, there will be a risk of harmful consequences or unexpected or expected losses resulting from natural disasters. So all this risk is already covered. I don't want to go into the detail of all the risk policies and all. So we can concentrate on the macroeconomic impacts of this risk. Okay. So when we are talking about the macroeconomic impacts, you may know that there are several variables like GDP, investment, savings, and employment, then output. Then there are so many macro variables. So most of the variables also will be affected by any of negative shock in the economy. So here you can see one graph. In the first graph, you can see the number of natural disasters per year from 70 to 2002. And also in the second graph, you can see the millions of people affected per year. And thirdly, you can see that the value of damage per year. So, it has a positive correlation when the number of disasters increasing, and the millions of people affected also will be increasing. And at the same time, the damage also increasing. The last 1 decade, you can see that the damage is also high. It means that when the disaster is happening, the damage is high. Then the damage is high. It means that there is a contraction in the GDP, or it will affect the GDP, or it will have a negative impact in the GDP. So if there is a negative impact in the GDP, it will affect the other variables like investment, savings, and other macro variables also will be affected. So if you're talking about the impacts, I mean, it might be a geographic or economic condition specific. So economic impacts of disaster varies according to the geographic and economic condition of a country or a region. So suppose that if you're dividing the countries, the advanced countries and developed countries, underdeveloping countries. So the developing countries tend to suffer most from the natural disasters, especially in terms of number of people affected and the value of damage, because these developing countries will be poor. I mean, very poor in the infrastructural facilities, and also they will have very poor management of this. Disaster issues. So obviously, the developing countries will be mostly affected with this natural disasters. Of more than 6,000 natural disasters recorded in 70 to 2002, 3/4 of this event and 99% of the people affected away from the developing countries. So these developing countries are mostly affected with these disasters. So in developing countries, natural disasters on an average affected over 2% of the population each year and cost more than 1/2 of the 1% of GDP in damage. So it means that all these damages which is happening for the developing countries is 10 times greater than in advanced countries. So this is a very big difference between the developed countries and also the developing countries. So there are several ways of impact. Firstly, it might be direct impact like loss of human and physical assets as reflected in a measure of damage once it is happened. Then in addition, secondly, we can say that there is a disruption of economic activity which may lead to the loss of income. And finally, there might be spillover at the macroeconomic level. So it will affect all the macroeconomic variables as physical and external pressure can lead to the even imbalances, and it may create economic crisis, and also it may aggravate the problems of poverty and inequality also. So this is the final stage. So firstly, it is the direct impact on the human and physical assets. Then secondly, it may disrupt the economic activity. Then finally, it will have a spillover effect on the other macroeconomic aspects also. So according to this, we can have two kinds of impact. The first one is short-run and medium-term impact. Then second one is long-run impact. So firstly, we can go to the short-run medium-term impact. So the first short-run impact is an immediate contraction in our economic output. So this is the first and the foremost and important impact of any disaster, because if there is any disaster happens, obviously there will be some destruction in the economy, whether it will be a physical asset or it will be a human asset. So this destruction will lead to the contraction in economic output, and also it will lead to contraction in the GDP and GDP growth. GDP growth might be coming down, and it may Hello.
Yeah.
Sahib?
Okay, it's fine. Go.
Am I audible?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's okay.
Sorry, some technical. Okay, so there is some GDP contraction, GDP growth contraction will be there, and there are different studies on this topic in 79, 2000, and there are some other studies also. So this contraction might be from 1% to 20%, and it is also region specific and also location specific. Secondly, a worsening of external balance. So when this GDP is contracted, it will have impact on external sector also, and there will be deterioration in balance of payment by amount of equal. One study shows that it might be equal to the 1/3 of the estimated timeline, and it can be high also. So firstly, contraction in output, and secondly, worsening of external balances, and thirdly, deterioration in fiscal balances. So as you know that if there is a disaster, obviously the government have to spend a lot. So it leads to higher government expenditure. At the same time, the tax revenue may not increase, and it may shrink because the people may not be able to pay the tax properly. So the fiscal balances, there will be a deterioration in fiscal balances, and it will affect the economy as a whole. And there is one study which is done by IMF, and it shows that the fiscal deficit has gone up to 3% of GDP through the negative shock or external shocks. Then finally, short-term effect is the increase in the poverty. Low-income households are mostly affected by this kind of disaster because their houses, as you know, it will be poorly constructed, and they will have a limited access to credit. All this will lead to aggravate the problem of poverty also, and it may also lead to increase the inequality also. So these are the different short-term and medium-term impacts. So if you're coming to the long-run impact, as I have said earlier, there is a spillover effect on other variables also, and it will affect the different sectors like agriculture sector, fishing and forestry, manufacturing sector. So this all, there will be some some kind of depression will be there in all sectors. And if the schools and hospital and some kind of infrastructural facilities are distracted, it will have a huge negative impact on human capital. And thirdly, reconstruction efforts by the government, and the government is spending too much for the reconstruction purposes. So it will have a crowd out effect. So I'm not going into the detail of all this. Then finally, fourthly, there will be increased indebtedness of the government because government wants to spend more for the welfare of the people. And finally, if there is a external imbalances, it will lead to high inflation, or even it may lead to the financial crisis itself. So these all are the long-term effects. And beyond that, there might be some volatility in the growth. The GDP growth, or there might be high consumption and income volatility because we may not be getting a smooth transition of economy. Obviously, especially for the developing countries, it will be negatively affected, and they will suffer a lot through this disasters. So, what are the mitigating policies? How we can reduce the disaster risk? So we can take effort, and we can put some policies to mitigate the disaster. Firstly, we have already discussed in the in yesterday's class also the role of insurance and capital market. So what is the role of insurance? If all the people are going with the insurance, it will lead to the spreading the burden of any disaster over the space and time. So this is a good thing because the people will be getting more time to manage this kind of disasters. But unfortunately, it's a sad story that less than 1% of the total direct losses from natural disasters are insured in the developing countries. So it is a very pathetic condition. But and there is a capital market is also another solution. Which can spread the exposure of a large number of investors. So instead of one or two investors, if there are a pool of investors, obviously the risk also will be shared among investors. So that can be another solution for mitigate the risk. And there are so many products in the capital market like catastrophe bonds or cat bonds, and catastrophe options, and catastrophe swipes, and weather derivatives. And if the people are going with this kind of capital assets, so it also will help to mitigate the disaster. Secondly, domestic public policy to reduce the risk and lessen the impact. So government also should take some policies to mitigate the disasters, like government can properly insure all the properties of government, and also the government should take some initiative to encourage the insurance of dwelling and other crops and other other all the properties. The government should should take some initiative to encourage this kind of insurance, and the government also should require some administrative initiatives, and also government can implement some social safety nets or social welfare schemes for the welfare of the people. Finally, all the government should have some kind of contingency funds which can be utilized if there is this kind of any disaster is occurring in the economy. So the final policy which can be adopted is international assistance and cooperation. So if there is a good cooperation with all the countries and all the multilateral institutions, it will help the countries to mitigate the effects of exogenous shocks. Multilateral financial institutions are also doing more in this area. The IMF and World Bank is also doing very well in this aspect. And IMF have separately emergency assistance for natural disaster product also, which is used 27 times since 1962. And World Bank also disbursed millions of dollars for a project relating to the disaster management. So these all are the different policies or options which can be utilized for mitigate the disaster risk. But beyond that, what I suggest is that the government should have proper planning, and the government should go with the proper planning, and also there should be some huge investment in the economy. Then only we can recover from these shocks. As you know that we have several theories like big push theory and low equilibrium trap theory. So big push theory, basically it says that there is a need of huge investment in the economy. Then only there is a possibility of coming out from this low equilibrium trap. So this kind of proper planning and policies could reduce these kind of problems and recover from this kind of recession and also this disaster risk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Yasser sir, for your nice and well-structured presentation. So in his presentation, he discussed about the relationship between disaster and GDP, how disaster is affecting national output, and what are the impact of natural disaster on macroeconomy. There are different types of impact: direct and indirect impact, short-term, medium, and long-term impact. Okay. Then he also discussed various methods to mitigate the disaster risk, and he has given some recommendations like building up of the contingency fund, then role of the government, then international assistance or getting the international assistance. Okay. So anyway, it was a nice presentation, Dr. Yasser sir. Thank you once again. And shall I go to next presentation, Susan?
Yes, sir, you can move to the continue with the presentation.
Okay, thank you. So we have now with us Mr. Ali Haider from NIDM, and he's basically a junior consultant in Center for Community-Based Disaster Risk Reduction at NIDM. He's a graduate in civil engineering and master's in environmental engineering. He worked in infrastructures and development sectors for many years, and he also worked as an intern at National Institute of Hydrology, Roorkee. So sir is discussing about the Sendai framework, understanding the disaster risk. So with due respect, Ali Haider sir, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the nice introduction. Is my presentation visible?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present here. So I'll try to finish it in the allotted 15 minutes. I will keep it brief. So I'll be discussing about the Sendai framework and particularly the first priority, that is the understanding disaster risk. It has already been discussed, the Sendai framework has already been discussed in the previous days, but I will give a brief intro about it. It is the first major agreement of the post-2015 development agenda, and it provides member states with the concrete actions to protect development gains from the risk of disaster. So because if we don't address the risk of disaster, we cannot proceed for a sustainable development. So we need to reduce the risk of disaster for achieving the goals of sustainable development. This Sendai framework works hand in hand with the other 23 agendas. There were so many agendas in 2030 being the target, including the Paris Agreement on climate change and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on finance for development and the new urban agenda, and ultimately the sustainable development goals. So this Sendai framework, the successor of the Hugo framework, and it shifted from reaction to prevention. In the previous frameworks, we were discussing about the action after the disaster, how we will recover, how we will rehabilitate. But in Sendai framework, the goal shifted from reaction to the prevention. So first we have to prepare to reduce the risk first. Then we can, if there is any disaster on a particular area or on a place, so we can work accordingly with the preparedness which we are doing for last few years. So the Sendai framework clearly states that in order to reduce the frequency and impact of any disaster, what is required is to better understand first the disaster risk, and then to improve the risk governance so that the existing risk can be reduced and the creation of new risk is minimized. So this Sendai framework has some goals. The goals are to prevent new and reduce the existing disaster risk. How we can improve it, or how we can prevent or reduce it? Through the implementation of integrated and inclusive economic, structure, legal, social, health, cultural, educational, and environmental, technological, institutional measures, which eventually will prevent and reduce the hazard exposure and vulnerability to disaster, to any disaster, and increase the preparedness for response and recovery, which will lead to make the community or the nation resilient. It will strengthen the resilience of a nation. The Sendai framework has set some global targets for 2030. Some are for 2030, some are for 2020. So the goals basically they are categorized in two different scenarios. First one is which we need to substantially reduce and which we need to increase. So there are 7 total targets. Four of the 7 targets are outcome focused, that is seeking reduction in human and material losses from disasters, and the other 3 are input focused, which are pursuing nationally led and owned mechanisms to reduce the disaster risk. So what are the targets which need to be substantially reduced? These includes, first is the global disaster mortality. The target is set aiming to lower the average of 100,000 global mortality rate in the decade of 2020 to 2030, which in compared to the period of the previous decade of 2005 to 15. The next one is to reduce the number of affected people. It is also aimed to lower the average global figure of 100 per 100,000 in the decade of 2030 compared to the 2005 to 15 decade. And third one is the reduce the economic loss in relation to the GDP. by 2030. And the last one which we need to reduce is the damage to the critical infrastructure, which is the main area for the development or for a sustainable development. So substantially reduce the disaster manage to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services, among them the health and educational facilities, including through developing their resilience by 2030. So these were the 4 targets from the 7 which we need to substantially reduce. Then there are the targets which we need to substantially increase them. First one is the number of countries with national and local DRR strategies by 2020. We need to increase the countries who have their own local disaster risk reduction plan and strategy, like India has their national disaster management plan of 2016 and then 2019 and previous ones also. So at a global level, they need to increase these type of states or member states who have their local DRR plans. Then there's a need to increase the international cooperation to developing countries. So, and the last one is the availability and access to multi-hazard early warning system and GRR. So these are the targets which need to be fulfilled till the end of 2030. Then the Sendai framework set some priorities. There are 4 priorities, including the first one, understanding the disaster risk. I will focus it in detail. The second priority is to strengthen the disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk. The third one is to investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience. And then the fourth and last one is the enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. So I will be just focusing on the first priority, that is the understanding disaster risk. What this priority states, what it focuses on. This priority policies and practices of disaster risk management should be based on an understanding of disaster risk in all its dimensions. What are the dimensions of disaster risk? These are the vulnerability of the people or the community which is living in that area which is prone to any disaster, the capacity of that community or the nation, and the exposure of persons or individuals and the assets which they have, the infrastructure, the hazards characteristics, and the environment. So such knowledge, if we have such knowledge, it can be leveraged for the purpose of pre-disaster risk assessment for prevention and mitigation and for the development and implementation of appropriate preparedness in and effective response to disaster. So first we need to understand what is disaster risk or just the risk. If we just go by the definition of risk, it says that the potential loss of life, injury, or destroyed or damaged assets which could occur to a system, society, or a community in a specific period of time, determined probabilistically as a function of hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and capacity. And if we want to just simplify it, risk is basically equals to hazard into the exposure to the persons or the assets which they have and multiplied by the vulnerability of the community which is living in that particular area. So what is this hazard? How can we define a hazard? There's a difference between hazard and disaster, which have already been discussed in previous years. So hazard is a dangerous phenomena, substance, human activity, or conditions that may cause loss to life, injury, or damage to the assets or infrastructure, or loss of the livelihood and services, social and economical disruption, or any environmental damage, which may lead to these type of damages. It is called as hazard. And what is the exposure? Exposure is a situation of people or the infrastructure, the housing, production capacities, and other human assets located in that hazard prone area, which is quite vulnerable or which is prone to any hazard. The area or the people or the assets which are which are in that prone area, hazard prone area, which can be damaged by that hazard. So the measures of exposure can include the number of people or types of assets in an area. And third one is the vulnerability. Vulnerability is the characteristic or circumstances of a community or the system of assets or the facilities they have, which is susceptible to the damage from that hazard. So risk can be just quantified in the terms of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. The dimension of disaster risk I have already told, which we need to understand and focus on to prepare for the DRR or disaster risk reduction. These are the vulnerability I have already explained. The capacity of the community to cope with the disaster, to minimize or mitigate the impact of any disaster. It is the capacity of the community, the assets they have, the knowledge they have. It is the capacity. Exposure, I have already explained. Hazard characteristics and the environment. Environment plays a very important role in calculating the risk. If we know the environment of the surrounding or the area, we can calculate the risk according to the characteristics of that environment. Now, the important areas which need to be focused, to achieve this priority, that is the priority 1. First one is the assessments and their necessary periodicity. Assessment of what? Assessment of risk, assessment of hazard or the vulnerability or the capacity. We need to assess all these things. If I just say what this priority 1 says, it talks about the data. We need data to understand anything. If we talk in science and technology, to understand any phenomena or anything, or to assess any sort of thing, we need the data. So data, how we can get the data? We need to assess the particulars, like if we talk about the DRR, we need to assess the risk, the hazard, vulnerability, exposure to the community, all the dimensions of the disaster, and their necessary periodicity. And we must know when we need this data, before the disaster or after the disaster. So we need to understand that periodicity also. Management of the information. Then if we have the data, if we have all the assessments, we have to manage it. We have to manage that information. That information should not be kept in the files. It should be transferred or disseminated to the people who are responsible and to the community who can be aware of any disaster for which they are prone. Then the development of disaster risk services, transformation of data and scientific information. This is just a management of the data. So if we have this data, we have to develop it. We have to see what this data says us. What could be the trend? What impact will be and a disaster, at what level it can impact the community or the area or the environment or the assets. Then we need to transform that data in the form of vulnerability and exposure and the capacity of the community. And then the scientific information. We need to include the scientific, the research and development informations, which are coming on daily basis from the different institutes of research. We need to incorporate that also. Free availability and accessibility of data and information. The data which the government or the system have, that should be available freely and should be accessible for all, so that they can be aware of the risk or the disaster. So systematically accounting for disaster losses. We need to account all the losses which can happen, which have happened, or what are these losses? We need to quantify the losses in terms of the people, the mortality, the damage, injury, damage to the assets, and economic losses, environmental losses. All these need to be quantified and accounted. Investment in research and development. This is the main core area, and IDM is also working on that. We are establishing a network of universities and institutions which can be so that the research and development in the field of disaster can be improved. Now there are some national and local level initiatives set by Sendai framework. First one is to promote data processing. What is this data processing? Data processing is nothing but if we collect the data, if we have the data, we just need to process it. Processing, we need to make some models. We need to make some graphs, some figures, which can tell us what could be the future trend or what could be the impact of the disaster. Strengthening of baselines, then evaluate, record, share, and publicly account for disaster losses. These things I have already discussed. Make information freely available and accessible for all. Promote real-time access to reliable data. We can use the GIS. We can use, there are many softwares, there are many technological tools which can be used for real-time access and to promote the real-time access of the reliable data, which can be accessed from anywhere on real time. Then knowledge building of officials and the community. This is the most important thing I consider, that if the officials who are responsible, the government officials or the NGOs or the community organizations which are responsible or which are working on the ground or which are implementing these Sendai framework or the National Disaster Management Plan or any framework, which they are required to be trained. They must have the knowledge how to implement it, how to build the capacity. They must be trained. And community must be aware of the disaster which they are prone to. If they are not aware of it, they cannot prepare for it. So to prepare the community, we need to aware them. We need to give them knowledge about what they are living in. And next one is to promote and improve dialogue and cooperation. We all know that if there is a dialogue on anything, it will eventually improve. There will be some ideas, if we do the dialogue at the science level or the technological level, there will be many more research areas, the development areas we can discuss. So we need to promote the dialogue. And cooperation between the science and the community, between the local knowledge or the traditional knowledge and the modern knowledge, or we can say the scientific knowledge. We need to cooperate these type of things. Use of traditional, indigenous and local knowledge and practices. It is very important. This also covers the Prime Minister's 10-point agenda, which says that we need to involve the community. If we involve the community who are living there, if we send, suppose if we send an expert to an area which is prone to a disaster, they will go, they will analyze the environment, they will take the data from the environment and anything. But if we go to the community who is living there, who is facing the disasters or these type of events from long time, so they know better things. They can improve our knowledge. They can improve the knowledge of the expert who can prepare the framework or who can prepare the strategy to mitigate the impact of any disaster. So we need that indigenous or traditional knowledge, and we have to then incorporate it with the scientific knowledge for the preparedness of disaster. Then strengthen the technical and scientific capacity. It has already been discussed that we need to invest in the science and development areas, research and development areas. We need to strengthen the technical and scientific capacity. If we improve the technique, what we can understand about the technical from the technical capacity. If we use the technology, if we see technology plays a very important role in recent time also, it plays a very important role in transferring the knowledge, to communicate, to make aware the things. If we just take an example of a mobile, it is a technical innovation. So in a mobile, we can spread the information to thousands of people in seconds. So we need to strengthen this type of technological innovations. We need to build the capacity of technology and science. Promote investments in innovation and technology development. We need to promote the incorporation in formal and informal and non-formal education. How we can improve it? We can introduce a subject of on disaster management, on disaster risk reduction. We as an IDM are working on it. We are establishing a network. I have already said they are the courses, the undergraduate, postgraduate courses of on disaster management are running in some institute, and it need to be promoted. It need to be improved, and in the non-formal education also. We need to promote the national strategies to strengthen public education and awareness. We already have our national disaster management plan, which have all the framework, how we should go to the community, how we can improve, how we can aware them, or how we can strengthen their capacity. So it should be promoted even more. Whatever we can do, it's not enough. Nobody knew about the pandemic, that it is going to happen. We didn't have a comprehensive framework for pandemic. So the national strategy should be strengthened time to time, and it should be promoted. Then we have to apply risk information in all its dimensions, the dimensions of disaster I already discussed. Enhance collaboration among people at the local level through the involvement of community-based and non-governmental organizations. There are several NGOs, there are several community-based organizations which are working on ground. So we need to collaborate the government agencies. If the government agencies collaborate with them and work with them, this could play a very important role in building the capacity of the community who is living in that area. Now, if we discuss, this was all about the priority one, the areas which need to be focused at the national or local level. Now, what we have implemented as a nation in the SFDRR. India is a member state in the SFDRR, a voluntary member, and we have adopted it in 2016 in our National Disaster Management Plan of 2016. Prime Minister inaugurated that, and we officially implemented it in India. So as I have told, that this priority first talks about the data. So if our responsible agencies do the research work and go to the community and collect the data and then disseminate it, first they have to process the data, then we can go to the other priorities, that is the governance, and then the implementation, the preparedness. We can go to that. So what we are doing as a nation, IMD, Indian Meteorological Department, hosts various hazards and disaster data products covering hydrometeorological events. So what is IMD doing? They have the data, they have this type of data of hazard and disaster data, then they convert it to the detailed maps of regional precipitation, temperature, and humidity. Then they give it with the reference of vulnerability and exposure of the community. IMD is also maintaining a countrywide network of 82 seismological stations that provide the information about the seismic activity for seismic activity and potential tsunamis resulting from undersea earthquakes. Then there's a CWC, Central Water Commission. Central Water Commission operates a network of 945 hydrological observation stations. It have the capacity to collect, compile, and storage of data covering river-related hazards and flood forecasting across the country. Then we have Geological Survey of India. inventory of landslides incidences is maintained by GSI, Geological Survey of India, which also comprises information about the glacial and perglacial geomorphology, snow cover studies, and other related informations under its glaciological division. So this is what India is doing to achieve this priority: first, to collect the data and to process the data, and then to make the data valuable or workable, or to then this data is available or in public domain. People can access it, people can use it for the research and development process also. So this was all about the Sendai Framework Priority 1, which topic I have been given to discuss on. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Haider, Ali Haider, for your wonderful presentation on Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030. So he has nicely communicated the goal of this framework and target of this framework, like reducing target and increasing target. And he also discussed priorities for action. He concentrated on understanding the disaster risk. He nicely explained what is risk, what is hazard, and what is vulnerability. And he also discussed various dimensions of disaster risk and what are the areas to be focused. Then national, local, and international level of policy initiative. Okay. Then finally, he discussed about the implementation of the Sendai Framework, Priority 1 in India. So it was a very nice presentation, and thank you for your time and thank you for your effort. Okay. Yes. So shall we go to the next one, Susan? Yeah, okay,
Yes,
thank
sir.
you. Okay. So it's the final presentation. For this presentation, we have with us Joy John George. He is working as the State Project Officer in Kerala State Disaster Management Authority. He was working with UNDP as the State Project Officer for the project KSDMA UNDP Flood Recovery Project. He is a trained social worker with more than 12 years of experience with government and non-governmental NGOs, especially for disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, community development, child right, microcredit, and macro enterprises. And he published many papers in papers and books, and also presented his research work in several international and national seminars. He also worked with World Vision India, Holistic Child Development India, and ISAF. Sir, you are invited to present your topic on Kerala floods and PM 10-point agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Shahuddin Ji, sir. Thank you for this opportunity, especially Santosh Kumar sir, Susan, and all the faculties in Farouk College. Thank you for this invitation to KSDMA. I hope you can see the screen. I guess we are already running late. Susan has told that 11:45 to 12 would be my time. However, we have crossed that. The topic that has been given to me is to speak on Kerala floods and Prime Minister's 10-point agenda. I assume that most of the participants would be from Kerala, and you all have experienced the devastating floods of 2018. And also you are also experiencing the recurring floods and landslides and various other natural hazards in the past 5 to 6 years. Without any disagreement, you all would agree that the climate change and other anthropogenic reasons have increased the number of disasters every year. Earlier, it was maybe once in 5 years a major disaster, major event. But as years pass by, we really experience more than one major disaster in a particular year. Now we have, this pandemic. We have already lost more than 25,000 people in the state, and still losing every day. In fact, the State Disaster Management Authority last year in February, 10th of February, 4th of February, we had declared the pandemic COVID as a state-specific disaster by the special powers that has been vested with the Disaster Management Act 2005. And later on, we know that that has been declared as a pandemic by the WHO, and the Disaster Management Act is being considered as the major legislative mechanism in bringing in various protocols and also provisions and penalizing people and violators and all those things. So we are very well aware of the importance of emergency management and disaster management. So coming to the presentation, I would be spending less time in the floods because you all are aware quite well. So I will not kind of again bring fresh memories of floods, but I'll just, as I've been asked to speak on it, I'll just go through it a few slides, and after that I will be flipping to the disaster, the 10-point agenda by the Honorable Prime Minister. So the rainfall assessment, as you are aware, the severe rains were there in August 2018. As you can see from the table, we have received 96% excess of the expected rainfall in the month of August. My previous speaker was speaking about IMD. Yes, IMD is the one which gives the rainfall forecast, but unfortunately it is only up to the district level, and hence the decision support system and the relevant decisions that the bureaucrats or the people's representatives should be taking is limited. And hence now we are also, the state has also got into agreements with the private players like SkyMet, Earth Networks, and so on, so that we receive pretty micro-localized predictions these days. Just to give a glance of Kerala floods, we see that it is the worst flood after 1924. So I'm sure all of us had the first experience of a severe flood in the state. We have lost 451 lives to the floods. When we talk floods, it is not just the floods, but landslides and storm, lightning also in particular cases. 260 villages were affected, as you can see on the map that has been given here. Almost the entire state is blue. The agriculture land was also severely affected. Almost 15 lakhs of people were in relief camps. It was all exhausted. It was all crowded. We couldn't manage so in certain places, as you may have experienced. 10,319 houses are fully damaged. In fact, this has gone up. And also 10,000 kilometers of road got affected. Dams were opened. And we also found the largest deployment of forces, the central forces as well as the state forces. The fire and rescue teams, we had around 100 teams deployed across the state. We had NDRF, 58 teams were deployed in different parts, especially the severely affected districts like Idiki and Alappuzha, Ernakulam, such places. We had NDRF, we had Army, we had Navy, Air Force, and the Coast Guard team also. Apart from this, we had various volunteer forces also. I'll come to that. The major sectors affected during 2018 floods are housing sector, transport, health, industries, tourism, especially. Agriculture sector was also affected, fisheries, power, environment and biodiversity, water resources. These were the major sectors which was affected. As I mentioned earlier, volunteers were at its best during the floods 2018. Many of you would have also volunteered along with the government and also NGOs in different districts of the state. We saw around 70,000 volunteers, including the fishermen, which received international acclaim. Wall Street Journal and other international media houses were kind of highlighting that the fishermen came with their boats to rescue inland, they came from the coast to the inlands to rescue people who are affected. So I should be mentioning about this need assessment study, which was done with the support of the UN. I was one of the experts, and out of the 76, we had different teams who came from different countries also. Also, we had World Bank, ADB, and European Commission. Of course, the state of government gave permission to do this, and it was first of its kind in the entire country in its entirety. Almost a month-long PDNA exercise was done, covering various sectors. So the finding was that 31,000 crore was the recovery need of the state. So I'll just close with that on the floods of 2018, and if there are any questions, I will take it later. So I will come to the 10-point agenda, which was declared by the Honorable Prime Minister in 2016 in New Delhi. And I had the privilege of listening to him directly on that conference. It was on the occasion of the Asian Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. In fact, a big delegation from Kerala, around 80 people, including the mayors and the panchayat presidents, many of the senior officials, we visited Delhi while the same CDRR was happening. And Honorable Prime Minister declared these 10 points. I will quickly go through all the points and also given some kind of a relevant action points which Kerala has already done. So I'm not talking about any theory, but the practical things that we have implemented, especially after the 2018 floods also. I'll highlight a couple of points in under each of the goals, and I will stop. So the first goal says, the first agenda says that all development sectors must imbibe the principles of disaster risk management. So as you are aware, also we heard about macroeconomics and the impact on the economics that disasters make. So the development sectors, of course, development and disasters, again, it's a big discussion point. So one side we need development, but we have to prevent disasters. So how do we do that? How do we balance development so that we reduce the risk of disasters? It's a big issue, which every state and every country go through. So we have a state disaster management plan. If any of you have not looked at it, please look at it from our website. You can go through it. It's a big document, but you can take out the relevant sections. And also we have 14 different plans for all the 14 districts. Disaster management plans are there. And I won't say many, but a few of the departments in the state also have disaster management plans of their particular department, which has been actually directed by the Disaster Management Act. And in Trivandrum City Corporation, they have taken special efforts in disaster risk reduction activities, since USAID as well as UNDP came forward to help the Trivandrum Corporation authorities to bring in a lot of changes with respect to their plans and with respect to early warning systems, with respect to the hazard vulnerability assessments and all that. In the state of Kerala, after the 2018 floods and after the PDNA, the state government took an initiative or took a decision to have a special purpose vehicle kind of a thing, which is known as Rebuild Kerala Initiative, wherein the World Bank also supports us with respect to preparing various sector level and sector-wise disaster risk reduction interventions, and which is underway now. And KSDM is also supporting this initiative. Coming to the second one, working towards risk coverage for all. In fact, the state of Kerala was the first in the state, first in the country to bring in a bank account for every family. So in one way, the financial inclusion was achieved in long back, actually 2017, I guess. And also we find that risk insurance is also being penetrated into various sectors like crop insurance, asset insurance, hazard insurance, vehicle insurance. Also now, after 2018, we have seen people have come forward to insure themselves and also their belongings, their properties to disasters. We also have various social security schemes by various departments, especially social justice department. The third agenda point is that encourage greater involvement and leadership of women in disaster risk reduction. So I need not elaborate on this, as you are all aware that half of the kind of half of Kerala's women population are already in the Kudumbashree mission or Kudumbashree's women self-help group programs. If I'm not wrong, it is I think 40 lakhs plus people, women, are part of this thing, Kudumbashree program. And after the 2018 floods, many of the Kudumbashree women self-help groups and individual women came forward for even constructing houses. So they had a group of women who constructed houses for the people who lost their houses actually after the 2018 floods. And also the state government came forward to help such women who were entrepreneurs by providing interest-free loans of at the rate of 1 lakh per person. So that was also, it was known as Ujjivan Vaipa, Ujjivan loan. So that was also given to women. And many of the women were trained in CPR, basic first aid, especially in Trivandrum City Corporation. We found that, in fact, we conducted various trainings for ASHA workers, Anganwadi workers, JPHN and all that. The fourth one is the investing in risk mapping. So the state in 2010, the National Center for Earth Science Studies, they helped the state in conducting or studying or mapping the hazard vulnerability and having a multi-hazard map and the kind of a susceptibility maps that they have prepared. And they had provided us all this technical know-how and all that. And SDMA further in the micro zones, we have studied and we have prepared various other maps also. Especially we had provided the local self-government institutions in the state. In fact, all the local self-government institutions were provided with around 30 thematic maps of their particular area. So that was around 30,000 plus maps which we provided to each of the local self-governments. In fact, we provided it digitally, as well as we gave them pen drive containing all these maps. The maps are also made public in the sense the SDMA website has all this hazard zonation maps. Anyone could go in and log in and download the maps. I think it is in KML file, and you can also look at it if you are well versed with the mapping and all that. And so very few states have done that in India, and Kerala is one of the states where the hazard maps are available for the public. We also have published various handbooks on disaster risk reduction, and the most latest one is the Orange Book of 2021, which directs the departments. Around 36 departments are being given various directions as to how they should respond to disasters or emergencies. I'll go faster. The point 5 says leverage technology to enhance the efficiency of our disaster risk management efforts. So in the state, since few years, we have the State Emergency Operations Center functioning 24/7. We also have well-established decision support system with which has modeling facilities and all that. And our experts, we have experts, around 70 of us from various disciplines. We look at a problem with multi-disciplinary approach and take the various decisions, and we advise the government as to what should be taken. We also have VHF connectivity, and also satellite phones are being available, given to all the district authorities, and we are also looking at the same in the taluk level also. The 6th agenda says develop a network of universities. So I would like to appreciate Farooq College to in taking the effort to have a collaborative program with NIDM on DRR, which is also KSDMA's agenda also, to have universities on board, especially the budding student community. Many of the students come in to SDMA to do internship, to do projects. We also work alongside with the universities like Amrita, CUSAT, Kerala University, MG University, and various other institutions which works under the universities also. For example, the Inter-University Center for Disability Studies, when we implemented the Disability Inclusive Program, in fact, they were the ones which trained the persons with disabilities across the state in 2017 and 2018. So that is definitely one of our agenda also. The 7th agenda says utilize the opportunities provided by social media and mobile technologies. Yes, I think SDMA has a huge social media presence, and we have followers, more than 1.6 lakhs followers of Facebook. We are also active on YouTube. Every day we provide the alerts, weather alerts, and any warnings through our Facebook, and also we have WhatsApp groups for various working groups and all that. Social media is also used for various campaigns which we conduct in the state. We also have a good network with the FM radio channels, community radios. We have in Kerala, we have 12 community radios. We work alongside with them. We also work with visual media. Build on local capacity. It's a major thrust area for us, especially after the 2018 under the Rebuild Kerala program. We implemented the local self-government department disaster management plans. In fact, all the 1,034 local self-government institutions have prepared their own disaster management plans, which are available on the KILA website. Any of you, if you're interested, you can go through it. It is a wonderful work. Of course, I will not say all are perfect in its shape, but we have given review comments to each of the plans, and they are now amending their plans as to to the next level. So the community-based programs are also there. We, as I mentioned earlier, we have a disability project which is working well, and we are now getting into, already started the transgender inclusive disaster risk reduction. We have this voluntarism initiative, especially to highlight one such is the Sannadha Sena, Samuhiya Sannadha Sena. Many of you would have already registered on it. We have a little less than 4 lakhs of volunteers in the state. We also have a good civil defense force which works under the fire department. We have the Apda Mitra, which is an NDMA project, which we have implemented in Kottayam districts. Now it is coming to all the districts. Ensure that the opportunity to learn from a disaster is not wasted. This is a very important point. So after 2018 floods, again, we had various led by the UN agencies, led by NDMA, led by NIDM. We had various meetings and conferences on lessons learned workshops, conducting lessons learned workshop and what improvement should be done and all that. And many of these recommendations, suggestions were brought in our annual plans and all that. In fact, the 10-point agenda, which I am presenting now, is also incorporated in the annual plan of KSDMA. So we align the plans to 10-point agenda. We align the plans to the Sendai framework. We also align this plan to the Sustainable Development Goals. So the last agenda is bringing up about greater cohesion in international response to disasters. As I've been mentioning, we have a good network with the international agencies like UN, World Bank, ADB, and all that. We are implementing a special project on national cyclone risk mitigation by the World Bank. It is known as NCRMP. Presently, we are covering all the 9 coastal districts, the state, constructing it is known as multi-hazard cyclone shelters. Multi-hazard shelters, in the sense not only cyclone but flood or landslide or earthquake, any hazard, they can go and be protected under the cyclone risk mitigation project shelters, which are presently 17 of them coming up in the state, and 9 of them are already functional. So these are some of the agenda, the 10 agenda and the activities or the interventions that the state took based on the floods of 2018. So thank you for this opportunity.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. John Joy Joseph, for your wonderful presentation and giving us a recap of 2018 devastating flood. You explained the severity of the crisis using the real data, like how many people lost their lives, how many villages and sectors were affected. Okay. You also highlighted the efforts of volunteers in rescue process, and also you have given us a post-disaster assessment. In your second part, you have now given us a detailed agenda or 10-point Prime Minister 10-point agenda, and how these agendas and points were not successfully adopted in flood recovery process of Kerala's 2018 flood crisis. Okay. So thank you, sir. Thank you, KSDMA, for this. And now the house is open for the Q&A session. Now the participants can raise your questions to all of us, to all our 3 panelists, Yasser sir, and then Ali Haider and John Joy Joseph. Any questions from the part of participants? Please come on. Okay, I think no, the participants, they're not asking any questions. So Susan, shall we move to the concluding remarks or concluding session?
If there is no questions from the participant side, we can move to the closing remarks.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, sir, one minute.
Yeah.
There is a question from the participant side, and which is to what extent we could mitigate economic vulnerability of a disaster risk.
The question is to, yeah, anyone can answer. Yeah, any resource person.
Yeah, I think since it is an economic risk, I think I can share my views. Then I think our other presenters also can contribute to that. Firstly, the disaster, if there is a disaster, obviously there will be some risk. We cannot avoid the risk, but we can reduce the risk. So if there is a risk, we can mitigate it, but it cannot be avoided. We should understand that. So, I mean, what are the policies to mitigate the risk? That is, that are the policy. What are the policies can be adopted to mitigate this risk? That should be analyzed, and not to avoid the risk. And this disaster also, it is unexpectedly happening, and we can expect it. We can't predict it. And I mean, some of the disasters could be predicted, but some others cannot be predicted. So if we can predict it properly, then only there is a possibility of avoiding this all risk. Okay, so unpredictable part is there. That's why this risk is always high, but we can adopt some kind of policies to mitigate this risk. I think some other presenters also can contribute to this.
Yes, I think I would like to add something to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can mitigate the economic vulnerability for sure, up to a very good extent actually. So suppose if we have a area of we have certain geographical area which is prone to earthquake. So if we build the resilience of the community in such a way that they build earthquake proof infrastructure, earthquake proof houses, hospitals, schools, colleges, then it will eventually mitigate the mortality rate. It will eventually reduce the mortality rate. It will drastically reduce the economic losses. And if an area is prone to flood or drought, so we can manage the crop pattern accordingly. It will mitigate the impact of it will minimize the vulnerability, or it will mitigate the economic vulnerability of any disaster risk. So yes, we can do that. Yeah, that's from my side.
Okay. Okay. So shall we move to the concluding remarks?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. So I'm inviting Dr. P. Muhammad Rashid sir for his concluding remarks on this 3 days training program. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Respected Professor Santosh Kumar, Susan, and other officials and dignitaries from the part of NIDM, other participants, students, resource persons, a warm regards and good afternoon from Farooq College. We have now completed this 3-day training program on quantifying disaster risk and risk reduction with special reference to Sendai framework and Prime Minister 10-point agenda. We have initially planned this program to organize 1 week back, but due to certain technical reasons, we could postpone this to this week. and we have started 2 days back. The basic purpose of this program we had various sessions on disaster risk and risk reduction, and we have discussed the Sendai framework and 10-point agenda. The basic objective of this program is to discuss the areas related with risk reduction and disaster management with special reference to hazard, exposure, and vulnerability of the risk. The basic areas covered was hazard, exposure, and vulnerability of a disaster risk. Key objectives of the program were to discuss the issues and challenges in disaster risk reduction, prevention, mitigation, preparedness, and response related with risk management and risk reduction, enhance the knowledge base of the participants about the qualitative and quantitative approach to risk assessment, and to explore the quantitative techniques and methods adopted in risk management. We have organized this program in collaboration with NIDM. NIDM was constituted under the Act of Parliament with a vision to play the role of a premier institute for capacity building in the nationwide as well as in region wise. The efforts taken by NIDM in this regard is quite appreciable, and we are very much thankful to NIDM and the organizers of NIDM or organizers of this program for selecting Farooq College for collaboration to conduct this program. I would like to say a few words with regard to this program. The program was, we think that this program was highly effective in understanding of disaster risk and its quantification. We know that in all situations, suppose an unexpected event occurs, we need to face it basically. If we understand the possible risks related with that event, automatically we will be able to reduce the vulnerable situations related with risk. You will be able to reduce the risk issues, and we will be able to solve it smoothly. I would like to point out one of the examples pointed out by some of our resource persons yesterday or day before yesterday. Suppose if you are crossing a road or a national highway, there is a slight possibility of occurring an accident. But if the person knows the rules and the rules to be followed while crossing the road, the probability of accident can be smoothly reduced. Can be reduced. And similarly, suppose if an accident happens in the same manner, it is most of the general public knows. If the most of the public knows the first aid procedures and initial activities of trauma care, then the risk of accident and livelihood vulnerability can be reduced to the minimum. With regard to disaster management, is quite necessary for each and every one of us to know the basic things and basic concepts related with risk and risk management in the context of unexpected risk. Because in today's session, Yasser sir rightly pointed out that the number of risks and disasters is increasing drastically nowadays. Besides, it is necessary nowadays that to include and incorporate the concepts of concepts as well as practical possibilities of disaster risk management as a part of curriculum, at least in higher education institutions. Because nowadays, most of the disasters occurs, or the vulnerability and risk related with the disaster is increasing due to human action. This can be reduced if each and every one of us are familiar with the concepts and the risks related with the disaster, and it can be properly implemented and practiced through formal curriculum. And automatically, it is also to be considered that a disaster management and risk reduction policy is to be framed in all administrative bodies. For example, in an institution, like educational institutions, in a hospital, and in all institutions as well as in administrative bodies, it is quite necessary to have a disaster management. They should have a disaster management policy, and it is expected that a state like Kerala can perform well in this regard, because we have a strong local network and strong structure of local self-government and effective interference in all risk-related activities. And it can be easily implemented and successfully practiced if we are having a proper disaster management policy in this regard. Basically, it is also to be considered that each and every disaster affects environment badly. Therefore, one of the resource persons pointed out yesterday that in a post presentation discussion, that the impact of vulnerability of disaster has increased drastically nowadays because of the actions of individuals or humans or the public on environment. We are adopting unscientific infrastructural development policies and activities by the government as well as by the public, and it makes the disaster more harmful than in the normal condition. Therefore, it is also to be considered that a disaster risk reduction framework is to be there is to be practiced in all developmental activities, both in public and private. And the awareness in this regard is to all, especially to younger generation, is like students, will improve the present condition. In economics, we are dealing sustainable development and sustainable development goals of an economy, and it is compulsory to know what sustainable development is. And in this regard, we can include the concepts related with risk reduction and risk management to the studies of environmental economics, and that should be a part of the academic activities. Besides, the effective participation and cooperation from the public in this regard is necessary for attaining the sustainability goal of each nation and each locality. Similarly, the participation of the public in the disaster management and disaster management policy making is also appreciable. Subjective elements play a crucial role in the process of risk reduction. Therefore, we should have a proper policy framework in this regard. It is also to be considered that in case of an educational institution like Farooq College, we are having more than 3,000 students. And suppose if you are organizing short-term courses in the short-term courses or short-term certificate courses on disaster risk and risk reduction policy, disaster management, it will be highly appreciable. We are looking forward to promote short-term courses in disaster management in collaboration with NIDM and other Ministry of Home Affairs. One important suggestion from our side is that focus is to be given in the areas such as practical solutions and methods that can be implemented and administered by each individual at micro level to reduce the disaster risk. The awareness in this regard will definitely improve the vulnerability due to disaster, and it can be easily overcome with suitable policy measures. And these kinds of programs is highly appreciable, and we are looking forward to organize these types of programs. In this context, we are very much thankful to the program team, especially Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, Executive Director of NIDM, and the principal of our Farooq College, Dr. K.M. Nasir, as the patrons of this program. Besides, we are very much, Farooq College is very much indebted to Professor Santosh Kumar for selecting Farooq College and Economics Department to collaborate to organize this, for having collaboration to organize this program. And I am very much thankful to Ms. Susan Sukanya She has been regularly contacting us and making suggestions and improvements to in the program schedule, as well as in she has worked hard to make this program a grand success. Similarly, we are also from the part of Farooq College. The coordinator, Dr. Muhammad Qasim, he also take a strenuous effort to make the program a grand success. We have insisted all the students under Department of Economics to participate in this program, and I'm very happy to see that more than 80% of the participants belongs to or come under the Department of Economics, Farooq College. Besides, few of our students raised the interest in doing their minor research project or dissertation work on the topic related with disaster management. We are also very much thankful to the IT team of and the digital wing of Farooq College. We hope that the objectives of the program have been achieved, and the knowledge gained through this program should be properly implemented in your daily life, and in your that should be in your automatically in case of sustainable development, as well as in your actions. It is quite necessary to consider the hazard to environment and how it is adversely affect the activities of the society, activities of the future generation. And therefore, these kinds of program will definitely strengthen the knowledge base as well as the attitude of the participants. Once again, we are very much thankful to the team NIDM, and let me conclude my closing remarks with these words. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rashid sir, for your thought-provoking concluding remarks. Now we are moving on to Valkyrie session or address. For that, I am inviting Professor Santosh Kumar, Head GIDRR and DRR NIDM. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for this, the whole of 3-day interaction with the Farooq College and participants. I'm grateful to the organizers of Farooq College, and I was listening to Muhammad Rashid and also that you mentioned about Muhammad Qasim and the principal of the Farooq College. The entire team of Farooq College we see as a kind of a potential partner in the future for not only this training programs, which you rightly said, that kind of demand which has come from the students for doing dissertation on the disaster management, and also kind of other activities where we can engage with. I would say 2-3 things at this point of time. One, that when we are entering into a kind of a discussion and dialogue with the new partner, especially the higher education institution, we keep 2-3 things. Like one, that they are a multidisciplinary team they are having with themselves. So like and disaster management is a multidisciplinary team. As yesterday, a lot of presentations were made on the quantification and the social vulnerability, economic vulnerability. Were also brought in that rather than the vulnerabilities as a quantified format, the infrastructural damage, and then also we talked about the opportunity cost loss. So here, if this kind of expertise built in the institutions like Farooq College or any other institutions where in the economics department, where you can get the support of other department as well, where the faculty are teaching and they are coming together, that would be a kind of a good beginning in capacity building within these states. Like you must have seen that after 2018 and 19 floods of Kerala, many experts came from outside also, and many experts contributed from the local area. I was listening to Joe also, and then he was making presentations, and he did mention about the Kudumsri and others also. So what I'm saying is this: if the local capacity is built, like suppose we develop a quantified risk at the district level, then you make a quantified plan at the below the district level. Who would be supporting to the state government in bringing out those kind of a quantified loss assessment due to disasters? So this is a kind of a beginning which we could see in the form of the quantified risk assessment. And no disaster management planning could be done in the absence of the assessment of the loss. And that's what we say, that the importance of what we are saying, that the departure, or we are moving from the kind of a qualitative assessment of risk to the quantitative assessment of risk. So there also that we see that a lot of merit in the engagement of higher educational institution for bringing those changes in India disaster management planning. So if you do that quantified risk assessment as a kind of a culture of disaster management, starting from taking the clue from that which we have already as a kind of a qualitative, but we need to go for quantitative. Now, the second very important thing where the economics department can contribute and influence the government's policy, local policy, in prioritizing investment in achieving the sustainable development goal. When you get the loss pattern, the quantified loss pattern, then definitely you can have a policy document. As in the beginning, it was mentioned in the closing remarks by our friend Mohammad Rashid Saab, that he mentioned that it is very, very important to look at those considerations. So now the things are changing, so we can see as a kind of a great success of this program. The third thing which I would like to mention, that how that culture of quantified risk assessment can begin. So there is a lot of kind of engagement with other institutes. Like one department of Farooq College can't do much in terms of the larger need to be addressed. So how we can help, maybe with an IDM or without an IDM also, you can go into building this kind of a capacity amongst the educational institutions. Whenever we discuss about disaster management, we hardly find capacity at the local level. A local level, state and beyond, we can find risk assessor, risk quantified management person, and they can do this kind of a modeling and every at the national level, or maybe at the international level. So how that can be built? So NIDM can also provide your student that opportunity of internship. So where you can send your student, they can get exposed to different kind of disaster management principles and all, along with the joint work with the Farooq College. So this program I consider as a good beginning with Farooq College in the process of understanding risk. And this understanding risk we are taking about that yesterday's session, whether we talk about deterministic or whether we talk about probabilistic, or we are talking about even the fundamentals of what is risk, what is uncertainties. If these fundamentals are made clear, then probably disaster will go in the right direction. Otherwise, it will go on hunches only. When we go on hunches, then the credibility of the engagement is not there. So if that is there in place, so if any district is making a plan and if they are coming as a constantly as a loss occurring to the districts, larger investment is happening at the district level. So those can be seen and can be thought of as Mr. Joe was showing that slide of damages and what kind of support they got from the central government and also the state government, various agencies. So disaster is a very holistic thing, and when we wish to achieve sustainable development goal, which is the priority of any economics department students or those who are studying economics, that how the development, whether micro level or macro level, it should work. Like suppose we say that if that larger economic losses are identified as the average annual loss, then there you can see that what kind of a monetary policy, fiscal policy can help in bringing those changes. And that is to be governed by this federal tools. And that federal tools, that is whether RBI can intervene or the budgetary provision, you can always, the state budget you can put that into place. So how that budget can be made in terms of the required risk management process. So if you are making an investment of say 10,000 crores in a year, and then you are giving a picture of quantified risk of the state or the districts, then district can very well take the proactive decisions that these are the things can be taken for the risk management. So I will not take much time. So I wanted to convey and congratulate the team, both the team of NIDM and also Farooq College, and also compliment the partnership. And I would say that partnership should not end here. It's a lot of learning both ways, that we could also learn many things, the conceptual issues, and I see brilliant presentations from the parts, from the resource persons. And I'm sure that students of and the faculty of Farooq College and also other participants who have joined this program must have benefited this. And I would ensure that we can also organize some more programs with the Farooq College, and their multidisciplinary team can also be brought in there for that. So what I would suggest here at this point of time, I will not quote anybody that who said what and all. Just I always say that always listen to the voices of the dead, and those who have died, go and talk to their dead bodies. Then you will find that, and question this, that whether the person could have survived, whether his death could have been prevented. And then you listen the voices of the dead, that then you will get that how these numbers of dead doesn't have any meaning, but if you talk to the dead bodies, or thinking that any individual deaths, premature deaths could have been prevented by our proactive actions, proactive actions. So there, don't believe in statistics, because we economists, we believe in statistics always, but statistics doesn't play any role in building relationship. It just becomes a number, and we get those numbers and we forget about that. So it doesn't give any emotional attachment or relationship building. So look at that also, but also I would urge economics department to bring some case studies, meaning when I'm saying talk to the voices of I like listening to the voices of the dead, meaning thereby that developing a case studies, that why 10 people died, why 100 people died, whether their deaths could have been prevented. So those are the preventable deaths, but they are dying. So one is that one, and the second is this, how to reduce the economic impact proactively. And there the role of, again, this quantitative and qualitative risk assessment would be, because no journey in disaster management begins unless we do this kind of assessment. So, but this journey, we have started our journey without making quantified assessment. So that is why you said that about the public policy, and public policy would be drafted once we get the good information about the impact assessment of one disaster. I would urge also that economics department should look at let us make 2018 flood as a kind of a benchmark of Kerala, and see the timeline study for 5 years, and see that what are the changes it is bringing in whether the structural changes are taking place, whether the risk management is taking place, or whether the Kerala state is still building risk. That is also happening, whether the vulnerabilities are changing. Yesterday we talked about V minus CP capacity, and so how the capacity is built in the state. So timeline, even pick up one department can pick up some issues like the children impact and opportunity cost of those children who became orphan. What is the opportunity cost lost to that children? He might be thinking, or she might be thinking, to become a doctor, engineer, pilot, bureaucrat, investor, or anything. But disaster has shattered their dreams. So this is the severe opportunity cost lost to the person. So how that can be quantified in such kind of a system, when we are talking about that social thing, we were doing as a kind of environmental impact assessment, and an impact in if any like landslide happen in Kerala, and then degradation, how to quantify those losses that happen to that. So these parameters also should be strengthened, and we can share Susan, I will request you that PDNA tools which we have developed, post-disaster damage and need assessment. And you can, this is a sectoral base and the post-disaster damage assessment that you can look at, and you can see that where the modifications can be made in quantifying those losses which has happened, with the social loss or with the economic loss in the environment or in other areas. So once again, thank you very much. And let us not stop here, keep building our relationship step by step, and then definitely we would be reaching to the logical end. Thank you, and wish you all the best, and stay healthy, stay safe, and this maybe before this new year we will meet again. So today I'm not saying that Happy New Year, I have a long way to go, and stay safe, because there are a lot of festive seasons. Kerala is into still into news because of the pandemic, and but gradually it is coming down. Hard work has been done. So my compliment to everyone, those who are working in this area, and also see that how quickly we can come out and go for the new normal. We can say that economists can understand very well that what we are talking about, the new normal. So business as usual now will not continue. We need to look at things differently. 20 years when we started, the syllabi of different institutions were different. And 2018-19 flood also said that now you have to think differently. Challenges are much more. IPCC report is also talking that challenges are different. You have to think differently. So curriculum, what we are having, whether it's updated or not, and whether the curriculum is justifying that those children who are undergoing this, they will attain those objectives, they will be equally trained or not. So all these things have to be seen in a holistic perspective. Have a discussion. You have a academic council. Have a discussion with other department as well, and see that how disaster management, that Kerala, if happened in disaster, the next time the impact should come down, one, the death, and also that economic impact should to almost to the zero kind of a target we should keep. Then probably we will start working and we can revive the policy if we may need it. Thank you very much to all of you. My team, Susan, Ali, then we have from our side, we had our team and Mr. Kim Naseem, Mohammad Qasim, and principal of our college, and all the team members, technical support of yours and mine both. I'm grateful to them, and I'm also grateful to Major General Anuj Kumar Bindal, Executive Director of NIDM, for encouraging such kind of a collaborative partnerships program and taking it forward to the logical end. Thank you very much. Once again, I wish you stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir, for your encouraging words. Now we are at the end of the program. So I invite Susan Sugenya for proposing the vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. I wish to present a formal vote of thanks for this training program on the topic quantifying disaster risk and risk reduction with special reference to Zendaya framework and PM 10-point agenda on behalf of NIDM. I'd like to take this opportunity to place and record a hearty thanks to the patron of this webinar training program, Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, sir, Executive Director, NIDM, for his support and guidance for the program. I wish to thank Dr. K.M. Nasir, Principal of Farooq College, for his support for the program. I would also like to thank the convener of this program, Professor Santosh Kumar sir, Head GIDRR, NIDM, for the continuous motivation, guidance, and support for this program. I would also like to thank the convener of this program, Professor P. Mohammad Rashid, Head of the Department of Economics, Farooq College, Calicut, for supporting and collaborating with us. I wish to extend a sincere thanks to Dr. Yasir P. Farooq College for taking the session. He explained in detail about the negative impacts of disaster on GDP and how developing countries are getting affected mostly by natural disaster. Thank you, sir. And I wish to extend my hearty thanks to Mr. Ali Haider, consultant of NIDM, for taking a detailed session on Zendaya framework. And he also explained about in detail about the global targets and focused mainly on the first point of SFDRR on our training program. And I wish to extend a sincere thanks to Mr. Joe John George from KSDMA. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, sir. He has explained about the rainfall assessment. It took us to a journey through a glance of Kerala floods, landslides, storms, everything. And he also explained about which are the major sectors which were affected during Kerala floods, and how Kerala is rebuilding and restructuring in alignment with SFDRR, PM 10-point agenda, and SDG goals. Once again, I thank all the respected resource persons of this training program. I wish to thank Sahaduddin I, Farooq College, for moderating today's session. I also wish to thank Dr. Muhammad Qasim for the continuous support for coordinating the program. I wish to place a record of hearty thanks to all the participants connected with us, especially from Farooq College and also from different parts of the country. I wish to thank all the representatives of state and central governments who managed to take out their precious time for this program. With these words, I would like to bring an end to the last day of this training program on quantifying disaster risk and risk reduction with special reference to the NIE framework and PM 10-point agenda. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you all. So with this,
Thank you all.
yeah, we declare
Thank you.
that the training program has been come to an end.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.